So welcome everyone. With the present regime in Afghanistan getting into real power, how the real politics is going to impact upon the global situation and the people in Afghanistan. We had already one session about Afghanistan immediately after the collapse of Kabul, and we have discussed many of the prospects. At the time, we had interviews by Afghan leaders, the Taliban leaders, especially to Al Jazeera, claiming that the present Taliban is a new lord. They are not continuation of the Taliban that was in control some 20 years back. So they would respect international laws, they said, but we have seen that there is nothing of that sort is there. The rights of women will be guaranteed, they said, but we don't see that anything of that sort is coming up. The women are already facing the casualties of the Afghan new regime, if that can be called a regime yet, because there is no proper government established yet in Afghanistan. But the city of Kabul is in the control of Taliban, and they have full control on the presidential palace, they have full control on the media, they have full control on all strategic parts of Kabul. But nobody should be surprised that this was all happening suddenly. If you see the background for some years, one could see that the rural Afghanistan, a major part of it was already under the control of the Taliban forces because it was not protected properly, and the population was comparatively a freight lot, and they were in control of the rural areas, but the strategic points, the government centers, the authority, everything was within the officially elected government. They had a strategy closer to what one would call the strategy of Mao Zedong before the Chinese Revolution. They've liberated villages, liberated in quotation, because they have taken control of the villages and surrounded small cities, and suddenly they approached the cities, and that's how they captured the cities earlier. And we have been seeing that the city of Kabul was surrounded very well, and any moment they could enter Kabul. There have been negotiations after the official announcement that the US forces and the Western forces would be withdrawing. There was a deadline made. There was an agreement that they should have safe passage to go, and a deadline date was also agreed. One of the major part of the agreement was that all those people who were citizens of other countries, as well as those people who have been working closely with them, and anybody who would want to leave the country would be allowed to go. And there will be a safe passage in the airport, and the airport would be under the control of the US forces. But what we have seen was a very clear violation of this agreement, that initially they agreed that all these people could go to the airport, but eventually most of the people who wanted to go to the airport were stopped. They were sent for verification and sometimes sent back. People with the US passport or people with the Indian passport or any other foreign nationals would be able to go, showing their passport. But the story already narrated by people who came out, that's already in the media. One of those people who have escaped from there, who was working for the US Navy, the kitchen, he was an Indian. When he wanted to come out, he has hidden his identity card under the shoes because he was almost sure that he would not be allowed to go if they knew that he was working close with the US Army. That was the situation. And he reports that many people are stranded behind. Those people who reached the airport, there have been a kind of an international record of people airlifted from the airport of Kabul. Every 16 minutes, there was one flight going off with people. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people were taken off who were working with United States, who were working with Britain, who were working with other forces, they were all taken out. But still there are a lot of people who are stranded in Afghanistan. Those people who wanted to go out because they knew, they could imagine what would be the rule of Taliban. They don't see any major resistance possible now because most of the forces who defended Kabul have gone now. And whatever they promise, whatever they claim, they would be going back to the old pattern which they followed, which is already evident from whatever reports they were getting from outside the city center, on the outskirts of Kabul. The Taliban has already started its way of justice. A justice wherein the framer of the accusation and the prosecutor and the judge and the executioner probably would be one person. So summarily, people were caught whom they consider enemies or suspects, and they were taken to a center stage of a crowd. Crowds were waiting for the great drama to happen, and somebody would read the accusation, and then the person who is at the receiving end is not given an opportunity to speak anything because already the person is tied up and the destiny is very well known, and there is no point in any argument. There is no, even in that situation, there is no opportunity to hear anything. There is no justice, no judge, nothing. The person who reads the accusation would also declare the punishment. In a few minutes, the punishment will be implemented also. What are the kinds of punishments? What they have already started now. They changed Afghanistan. They changed new Taliban, as the supporters of Taliban would claim even now. They would cut off the hands of a girl just because she was wearing nail polish. I've seen a brutal video. I could not see it completely. And after cutting off, to make it aesthetically, with a blunt knife, they try to rough it, and the hand is put down in boiling water. The cut hand, not the piece out, but the hand. In another video which I have seen, which most of you have seen as well, the accused person, suspected to be a homosexual, is brought in, and the accusation and summary trial, everything happens all together in 3 minutes, and the verdict is made, and he is put down, and with a blunt blade his neck is slit. It's happening everywhere outside the Kabul city. This is what is happening now. I've seen another video where a lady who has been wearing a high-heeled shoes under her burqa, and a part of her feet was seen. So she gets a punishment after a summary trial, lasts for 5 minutes, and point blank shot on the top of her head. So this is what is happening in Afghanistan. This is what is happening. This is the promised future of Afghanistan. If anybody wants to question, even by a little deed of their life, against the diktat of these people, or the interpretation of these local implementers of this law, that they want to get into Afghanistan at every part of it, are taking law in their hand and implementing it. The world is stunned, world is shocked, but no one knows how to handle the situation. If the promised land which these people have been trying to attain, or the power that they are coming to implement for, is something the people of Afghanistan do not want, nobody except those people who are totally afraid and speaking against their will is speaking out. their mind. They cannot speak out their mind. There was a demonstration of women who got organized under the leadership of a great activist for the rights of women, was brutally suppressed. There were some students who came out to make a public show of opinion by shouting against it. Machine guns responded to them. So eventually, all possibilities of a dissent, all possibilities of a questioning, all possibilities of any kind of challenging the authority is getting completely wiped off. Every woman who wants to live there, who has no opportunity, who do not know what to do now, are trying to buy a long blue burqa. They want to hide in that. Still, the Afghan Taliban representatives could come to your home and check whether there is a girl who is above the age of 15 to be taken away for forced marriage or to become a sex slave to the great fighters, as they call them. They were promised not only an Islamic nation, but also whatever they wanted, which included money, weapons, power, and women as per their wish. And how would they get all these women? They are going into houses and houses, looking for girls who are above 14 or 15. And they are forcefully separating them to be taken to satisfy the promises given to these soldiers. Soldiers in quotation. These soldiers are not trained people. Maybe they are, trained to use a gun. There is no real order. Each set of people with guns are controlled by small group leaders of Taliban gang, and everyone has their own special way of implementing the laws. So it's a country of chaos. It's a country of extreme poverty now. It's a country of malnutrition. It's a country of fear. It's a country where there is no authority, and it's a country where life and your continuity is not ensured. One of the worst possible scenarios the present global situation can ever experience. That is what is the present Afghanistan is. And it can be worse in the coming days. It can be worse in the coming months. It can still be worse in the coming years if there is no change. I would like to use that word, the regressive left. The regressive left, not the progressive left. All around the world are trying to justify what's happening in Afghanistan. It's people's self-rule, they say. I've heard people speaking that it has been a great victory of the people of Afghanistan against imperialism. And victory of whom? If that was a victory of people, the people of that country would not try to flee, would not like to climb on aeroplanes. Even on the wings of it, they try to hang on and try to escape. If that was a promised land of all good things that the people of the Taliban leadership is claiming, this kind of an exodus would not have happened. They know. They have seen what Taliban is. Even if they claim very differently, and a certain section of the media try to, give a kind of credential to them, the people who experience this, the people who have heard their stories, and the people who have been seeing and hearing what is happening now on the outskirts of Kabul and different parts of Afghanistan at this moment, they want to escape. But where would they escape to? Who can take all these people? So now the last day of evacuating people is over. Millions who wanted to escape are stranded there. What would they do now? What will happen to them? Are the global forces, the people all around the world are not concerned about that situation? Of course, everybody is concerned, but there are not much strategies now available. So the one of the major claims that the Taliban leadership was making get approved by the world powers was very simple, that the status of women, which was a major challenge that is now faced by the Afghan citizens, would be better and that would be improved. But they, with a comma, they would add, as per the rules of Sharia and as per Quran and Hadith, which means what is Quran and what is Hadith? For the people who are implementing that in Afghanistan has a very clear understanding that what they think right and what they want to implement can all be sanctioned from the old tests available from the ancient war situation that Muhammad has been going through. They could find easily sanctions for everything that they would do. I mean, including if you take the hadiths, they can easily find justification for everything. But what they don't understand is that the majority of the Muslims all around the world do not practice them. Like if you go to the Old Testament, you can see similar things. I mean, for example, stoning for adultery. You can see such things happening in Old Testament and justified in Old Testament, which is followed by the Jews as well as by the Christians. But there has been a great change in their faith structures, and none of the Christians are sleeping cells, as many people would say, and looking sanctioned for this kind of behavior from the Old Testament. Similarly, I don't think the majority of the Muslims in the world are not sleeping terrorists and extremists looking for getting a religious sanction for the kind of behavior that Taliban would do, and they would start doing similarly. No. The people, even in France, when the famous Charlie Hebdo cartoons were published, when the terrorists attacked the offices of Charlie Hebdo, the whole world denounced it. And what would be the response of the Muslims in France? There are clear surveys that show that the majority of the Muslims in France, in fact, France has the largest number of Muslims in Europe, did not approve this behavior. They would like to denounce that. But those people who defend these kind of things are loud and they speak and they have more voice and they could silence all critics and even moderate Muslims to a very clear state of fear. Fear is the key that they're using. The biggest weapon that Taliban is using or the Islamic extremists are using is fear. People are afraid. The Muslims are afraid. The other people are afraid. And out of the fear, there is clear fear about the whole Muslim population, which cannot be justified because the majority of the Muslims are not extremists or radicals, and majority of the Muslims don't even sanction approve these kind of activities. But that's not enough. These radicals, these extremists, these forces of Taliban and other extremist groups who are trying to exert their extremist ideas with the violence and weapons are more vocal and they have power, and the governments themselves are trying it hard to counter the situation. I mean, what is how, for example, why, for example, we would now consider Taliban is an illegitimate force which cannot be approved as a nation, which cannot be accepted by any kind of civilized world is mainly what they try to do in the name of Islamic justice. For example, in the major concern is that women are forced to wear parda, and anybody who they doubt is defying would be punished, and there is no separation of judiciary, executive, and legislature, because there is no legislature. And they would want to establish an emirate, which would be something like a kingdom, would have a different kind of pattern than modern democracy, and they would have a supreme religious leader. It's already announced, but who would be the supreme religious leader, and how would they implement all these laws, and how would they get hold of these local forces who are trying to control the local situation is not very clear, mainly because these local forces are not directly under the control of the forces who are in control of Kabul. They are in control of the warlords far away. In Afghan structures, it's like old feudalism. There are warlords who are controlling the opium, because Afghanistan is a land of opium, and opium production is one of the major income the extremist groups found their resources from. And that's not in control of any government or any system, and it's illegal, but that's controlled by warlords who have their own little armies, their own little weapon collection, and their arsenal is improving. All the wealth that they amass through the opium trade is now transferred into making their own mercenary army and buying weapons. And these warlords sometimes are fighting each other based on their allegiance to different groups. If you think that all Taliban forces have one ideology and one way of doing things, it's not correct, because these warlords and the religious organization closely connected with them are contradictory, and they're fighting against each other. And on the other side, one would see that the kind of judicial position that each warlord would take is contradictory to the judicial position that the other warlord would take. Sometimes one sees fighting between these people. They're trying to kill each other. They're trying to win people of the other side. And if you see that the whole of Afghanistan is under the control of the Taliban, no, it's not correct. The whole of Taliban is under the control of several mutually fighting warlords who keep on religious leaders to get their own things going the way they want it. And they are trying to implement their own likes and dislikes. There are their own hatreds and anger towards people who do not belong to their clan or their group, or who would be a threat to their future and their economic resources. The warlords are part of the game of the Taliban. Anybody in Afghanistan would come to power or remain in power only when they would win the warlords. When they have the support of the majority of the warlords and their mercenaries are at their disposal, then only they would be able to get the support of the local groups. And if you think that the majority of the people are following these people, no, they are not following. All clear documents and all clear evidences show that the local groups are generally a band of something like 25 to 100 people who have weapons, lethal weapons, and behind them there are warlords who have a lot of money. And these small warlords are controlled by bigger warlords, and it's a kind of a hierarchy that goes with the warlords. And the present Afghan leadership, or the Taliban, can remain in power or remain in control of the rural Afghanistan only when they can win these warlords. So what is the kind of Islam, what is the kind of Islamic rule that they would be bringing is very clear with the present real politic around them. So most of these people are coming from the tribal mindset. Their leadership, the warlords, are tribal chiefs, and their authority is coming from heredity, not by any election or anything, or by the power of the gun. And that is the kind of people who are in control. So who would control these warlords or the controllers of the opium fields? Will the people in Kabul be trying to establish a political structure there, or will they establish a revenue structure? A nation needs resources. What is the available resources now for the present regime? One possibility was international trade. Now with the borders closed, international trade almost would come to absolutely zero. The women, half of the population is absolutely sidelined. You know what they cannot do? They cannot go out without a full covered burqa. They cannot go out without a male family member. While they are on the street, they cannot take the conversation. They cannot start a conversation with anybody who is a male. They cannot bicycle. They cannot drive. They cannot go to school up above a certain age. 14, 15 years, they're stopped to go to school. You know what the women are doing who have degrees? They burn their degrees. If they are identified that they have gone to a university and got a degree, that could be a reason to be executed. The sportswomen are throwing off or burying their medals and certificates. Any kind of fine dress that young girls would wear, they all are burning and buying burqas. To survive in the contemporary Afghanistan, you have to sacrifice a lot. Still, you may not survive. You can be simply taken away because most of these mercenaries who were in the fight were promised of any number of girls they wish. And they have a pool of sex slaves. And women are taken into that. And women are forced to marry. I was hearing reports that like it happened during the ISIS influence, women could be sold in the market. The ISIS soldiers in quotation, ISIS militants would be the correct word. They were capturing Yazdis, raping them or killing them. If they survive, later they would be sold to something like $500 or something like that. One could buy. And most of the women who didn't want to go to the sea, they disfigured their face, not to be attractive to these people. That was the kind of situation that was there in the Iraq, Syria, ISIS influence. Similar situation is prevalent in under several tribal lords in Afghanistan. People who are opposing, people probably have said their opinion, people who have been in the public sphere, who made their opinions earlier public, are caught, are asked to be the wives of these mercenaries. But not to be a proper wife also. It's a forced marriage. And eventually thrown off to the pool of sex slaves and taken by some other soldier or raped repeatedly. And most of them end up in a miserable life or in suicide. So that's what is waiting for the women in the rural areas of Afghanistan. In Kabul, this may not happen, but even in Kabul, you have total control on the women. It's another word which one can use is it's a gender apartheid in Afghanistan. 20 years back, when 4 or 5 years, then they were in control. Again, that was a gender apartheid, and that has changed. You know, the people of Afghanistan have experienced a lot of freedom, and they have experienced what's the value of freedom. They have experienced the value of education, art, music, culture. All they have experienced during the earlier regimes. Afghanistan was one of the most progressive parts of the Islamic world around there in the Central Asia and in South Asia. But they have seen the other side of it, the other extreme of it. Everything was taken away from them. And they were living in terror and fear. When suddenly, after the changes, after Taliban was defeated, a new regime came, a new government came, and women's rights were respected, and they started going to the universities, and they started going to activities, and their identity as a female was not subjugated, but they became part of a civil society where everything is normal with other people. Women could dress the way they want, and they could go out. I mean, they could talk with friends, they could go to a university, they could go to a cafeteria, everything was allowed. There were so many international institutions there in Kabul. There were so many international organizations working there. Most of the world nations have been putting in money abundantly to help Afghanistan normalize situations. Many people think about United States only. They have put in a lot of money for the infrastructural development. India, for example, has been doing a lot in Afghanistan. India has been helping Afghanistan to construct roads, to construct bridges. Even the parliament of Afghanistan was constructed by Indian engineers going there. They have designed it, they have made it, and the Indian civil engineers were behind the whole thing. And the whole money for building their present parliament was given by India as a gift to modernize Afghanistan. United States has started a lot of institutions there. They started regularizing a lot of things. $2.5 trillion they have invested in Afghanistan on a span of 20 years. But that's not the money spent in Afghanistan. Many other countries, if you take the whole money that was spent in other countries to get this part of the world as a part of the civilized world, one would be really surprised why it did not work. Perhaps one of the answers that one can give is there was no proper monitoring of the expenditure that was going through in Afghanistan. Whether this money intended to be using to support people, to encourage them, to enrich their life, was mainly spent on urban cities like Kabul and did not reach the rural places. Like in many countries, the Aborigine or the ancient people lived in that area, whether it is in United States, whether it is in Australia, whether it is in India, where the Aborigines were, all the governments are trying to support them and a lot of funds are diverted for them. But are they really benefited by that? That's a serious question. In Afghanistan, this has been a serious question. There were serious doubts about the kind of siphoning of the money which was meant for developing Afghanistan. Siphoning of the money which was meant for building up infrastructure at the rural area. That was not done properly, and that was not done according to the wishes of the people who gave this money. There was modernization which was seen in Kabul and the suburbs of it, but in rural Afghanistan, everything was as it was during the Taliban times. But one could see that locally, religious institution is practically taking control of their lives. There was no clear jurisprudence reaching the rural areas. There was no clear implementation of law in the rural areas. And that is where things did not really change. Only the system at the top changed. And the rural areas, it remained almost the same. And it was easy for Taliban to win the rural areas stage by stage. In the last 5 years, they have been advancing in rural areas. Nobody took care of that thing. All the people, like in most of the part of the underprivileged part of the world, we only see about the urban world and the capital cities where there is a lot of development happening. But without getting the support of the rural part of the country, you cannot keep the country as a big unit which would be resisting against such moves. There was no real education to people to equip them against any kind of extremist ideas. The modern education, which respects civil rights, which respects gender equality, which respects the right of other people, which respects tolerance, was nowhere available in the rural part of Afghanistan. The whole money was spent on building things, buying equipments, and reproductive investment. In fact, a major part of the money should have been spent to build up human resources in the rural areas, to educate people, to build themselves, and to create a situation that they should have developed a new leadership in the rural areas to challenge the traditional authority of the the warlords and the opium managers. The new government did not stop the tribal chiefs and the opium lords. They did not stop the mercenaries collected at the local areas. They tried to negotiate with them. They tried to make agreements with them. They tried to buy peace by agreeing to their whims and wishes at the local area. But in Kabul, they made a bubble, which was not real for the whole of Afghanistan. But still, that was little breathing space for the people as compared to what they had some 20 years back. Still, it was better than the brutal times that they had during the Taliban regime. Still, it was comparatively better than what they knew what Taliban has been doing earlier. But eventually, when all these local areas were controlled and they started implementing the old style of things, Kabul was busy in international negotiations, fighting for more funds and putting in more funds in the city of Kabul and Kandahar, and did not do anything for the rural population. You know, one of the most underprivileged people in the whole world is the rural people of Afghanistan. There's malnutrition, there is hunger, there is poverty, there is not much production, and they were surviving based on their little cattle rearing and getting some work in connection with the poppy fields. They were not taken care of. There was no nation building that was happening. That is why it was easy for a force like this, without even a central command, could take over the country. Now, everybody wanted to escape. The foreign powers who wanted to build Afghanistan or promised to build Afghanistan, they escaped first. All the countries wanted to save their diplomats first. Understandable, that's important. And then they wanted to save their citizens first. Yes, understandable. Then they wanted to help those people who were part of their system, who were training and working closely with them to escape. And to a great extent that was possible, but that was in Kabul and its suburb only. The vast majority of the people are left behind. It's obvious that nobody wants this brutal regime there, except a band of Taliban leaders and their supporters. But nobody has the courage to fight against that. They have no weapon. Nobody can speak against that because they will be suppressed. Nobody can raise a momentum against them because they will be brutally killed in one of the possible brutal ways that we know in human history. They can be slit, their neck can be slit publicly. They can be whipped and their hands could be cut off. They can be hanged publicly. They can be thrown, they can be buried, half buried, and stones can be thrown at them till they die. All these things are possible in Afghanistan. All these things are happening in Afghanistan. So now what's the solution? Allow these people to get rotten in this situation? Well, power has wheels and it rolls in any situation, but the people who are crushed under that is never thought about. That has been like that all the time. When empires were building, nobody cared about the people who buried under all these kind of things. When empires were making new advances, nobody cared about the people who were suffering. Those were different times. Now we have a universal declaration of human rights. We have experienced the horror of 2 world wars, and there is a new world, especially after the Second World War. So what are we going to do with Afghanistan? Can that be stopped in any way? That's what is now discussed by experts all around the world. What are the possible scenarios? What are the possible solutions that we have to make a radical change in Afghanistan? When that can happen? That's the question. The most difficult question is, who would take the initiative to end the brutality of Taliban and how it is possible? There are 11 provincial capitals in Afghanistan. All the provincial capitals have fallen now. And any city that has been under the control of any other forces anywhere is completely, controlled by local Taliban forces. They are not under a central command. They are autonomous mercenaries kind of people who are trained by their religious teachers and whose leaders are trained by the religious teachers, and their army is the mercenaries. Mercenaries means people who are paid to get their services coming from the opium lords. And Taliban absolutely controlling more than three-fourths of Afghanistan. There are some pockets where still some people who are not still under the control of Taliban, but they will also fall in another month. It's very clear, or in a matter of a few weeks. So whole of Afghanistan will be under control of Taliban. But what can be done for that? United Nations, can it do something? Can United States rethink about their role in Afghanistan? Can NATO interfere? Can there be an international discussion and understand this position and force these people to be civilized people? What are the possibilities? What can we do? So the captured soldiers, there are many soldiers who were fighting for Afghanistan, trained soldiers, but the training was not real appropriate. Most of the money was siphoned off and the training was not very, very correctly done. But the soldiers who were captured are summarily tried and executed. So there won't be any soldiers with any weaponry after some time. Anybody who is caught is summarily tried, and in 24 hours the execution is done. That's the kind of trial they have. So US has left a lot of weapons and a lot of armory and a lot of powerful equipments which they try to use. That they are in control of that. In Kabul, there is an elite force already established. They are traveling in the jeeps that the US Army men were using, and they're protected with the weapons that they have been using. Many of them even do not know how to use these equipments. I've seen an interesting, of course, a video that a Taliban soldier is trying to see how a special gun which they got from the American collection left behind is used. He tried to use it and he tried to shoot it upwards. No, it doesn't work, and he put it down and hit. And of course, the fire is cracked, and it takes off his head and goes. That's the kind of trained people that they have at many places, but they have lethal weapons. A weapon that is used by anybody under a control or a line of control, even that can be dangerous, but a weapon that is used by people who have no training and who have no idea of what is a line of control of a military, and who have their own ideas of what is justice and how it is to be implemented, can be the most dangerous things all around the world. That can be the most dangerous things. And what's next then? What's the possibility? So there are 2 or 3 possibilities now discussed by strategicians all around the world. The strategic institutes are discussing several possibilities. Political scientists are thinking about what are the possible scenarios. I'm part of the strategic analysis studies, and I can say that one of the major strategy that is being discussed now is the strategy number 1 is slow strangulation. That is the first strategy. The strangulation means the Taliban's main strategy has been to occupy the rural areas, as I have earlier told, and they have been surrounding the cities. Now the strategy is playing out on the nationwide. Now, how much Kabul is surrounded was the major question. That was the major concern when people were leaving. But can this same strategy be used against them? Identify the power centers, identify the places where they have real authority or weapon collection, and surround these places with a possibly influential group. And who can be that group? Can there be any group in Afghanistan still surviving who would be able to communicate with the forces outside? Will they survive? If they can survive, if there is resistance at different places, And if they can corner these places and strangulate these local areas, that could be an easy strategy than trying to win the whole country, liberating small areas. The strongholds of Taliban, if one tries to strangulate them from all sides and win over them with possible support from outside, that's one strategy that's possible. There are a lot of people who are willing to do things, provided there's a possibility of winning, provided there is a possibility of survival, provided there is a possibility of defeating Taliban. Can the same strategy of strangulating cities, strangulating strongholds be implemented with the support of the remaining people who want to end the Taliban regime? Can they be provided with weapons? Can they be trained? This is one possibility which may not be done immediately, which is immediately not possible. It needs some more time to identify these people and to identify their support base and to train them, find strategy of cornering cities and cornering the power centers locally, not in Kabul, but in other areas, and liberating small areas and liberating areas and getting people into those areas and finally strangulating Kabul. That could be the same strategy that Taliban tried, but with more weapons and more drones and other weapons involved. This could be implemented. That's strategy number one. So the one possibility is there will be lack of resources for Taliban. Even if they formally establish a government, since it cannot be legitimized that easy, and it will be difficult even for those powers who want to get a hold in Afghanistan for geopolitical reasons or strategic reasons, like Russia and China, even Pakistan, who is very much interested in Afghanistan. Of course, the whole Taliban came from Pakistan, from Pakhtunistan support. That can be one way, because supporting Taliban can be seen by the international community as a serious offense against international order. Anybody cooperating, anybody giving support to Taliban should be isolated. There should be an international atmosphere in favor of that. It may not be very easy for all those people who indirectly provided weaponry to Taliban also to recognize it that fast, or to have economic relations that fast. As you know, that one of the first world leaders who expressed happiness about the taking over of Taliban was Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan. He found it as a great victory against the foreign forces there, and he was in a jubilant mood celebrating it. If you see the Pakistan newspapers and the opinion of the radical forces in Pakistan, one sees a great amount of euphoria about what is happening in Taliban. Not only because it is strategically interesting for Pakistan, but also a section of the radical forces in Pakistan are trying to gain real power from Taliban. Taliban is not limited to Afghanistan. There is a Taliban in Pakistan also. And they have interest in Kashmir. So they have an expansionist plan. Originally, they said that they have nothing to do with Kashmir. They are interested only in their local issues, and it is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. But yesterday, they already made their position that Pakistan is a place, the next jihad is for Pakistan. The Kashmir is an important project of Taliban, and the next jihad is for Kashmir. It's not officially coming from the top bosses of Taliban, but some of the very respected ideologues of Taliban are speaking about Kashmir next, which shows that they have expansionist plan, and that can be dangerous for many parts of the world, and it can escalate into a big conflict. So therefore, what one could do should be, an international clear understanding that cooperating with Taliban would be considered not an acceptable behavior. And if economically Afghanistan is strangulated, when the resources are coming down, they won't be able to do much things in the rural areas, and that can be a possibility of time frame where one could develop resistance groups locally and to isolate local Taliban groups. They are all not in Kabul, but the price that we pay may be very, very high. Because when we stop all economic activity with Afghanistan, when the international trade is stopped, all communication or any kind of economic activity with the world is denied. And what's going to happen to the people? At the end, the common people will suffer really, really a lot. If any kind of sanction, directly or indirectly, is done over a nation, the quality of life of the people, even if what you have, at rural Afghanistan, cannot be called even, any standards. It's not quality of life. And whatever they have, even at this moment, what they have will be in jeopardy. Their life will go into misery. Their living standards will further fall down. There will be more malnutrition. There will be more hunger. There will be more difficulties in the rural areas. But still, we cannot change it. Even under Taliban, there is no promise that things are going to change. But one of the ways to stop Taliban gaining more power is strangulating them economically and thereby allowing the local groups to generate strength and isolate the Taliban forces locally, because their numbers are less. They have more weapons. And they're so brutal, people are afraid. There should be more courage instinct in people, and they should be able to gain more strength. And if possible, they should be able to come up forward as a resistance movement, if necessary, with weapons. That's one way of doing it. The other possibilities, the ultimate victory they feel they've got now. Giving them a clear understanding that this victory is nothing. They haven't gained anything. Because what if a country exists, if it's not recognized by any part of the world? Will the world community join in a chorus to denounce it? And on the other side, force the present Taliban leadership to tone down their radicalism and to, for example, to allow children to go to school, go to work, and compulsory burqa and all these kind of things. Can one negotiate with Taliban with strong sanctions first and reducing the intensity of the sanction by getting them reformed, by forcing them into an economically strangulated situation? That's another possibility. So you cannot outnumber the armed people with a mass population, for example, 10,000 people at one side resisting and 25 people with the advanced machinery in their hands. The machinery would win, because modern machinery works so powerfully. With one gun, you can kill 1,000 people. So it's not, the casualties will be very, very high when there is a conflict emerging in the rural areas, unless and until you equip people with the weapons. There the casualties can be much, much higher. Somewhere, one has to pay some price to come out of it. There is no easy solution. The other way is negotiating strong sanctions and negotiating for forcing them to make changes in the system. That's another way of doing it. So to make a political order, forcing them to have an election, forcing them to have democratic elections and opposition, much of it may not happen. For example, nobody can force China to have democratic elections and an opposition party, because they have a clear national position that that's the kind of democracy that they're having. They call it people's democracy. You cannot force China with any kind of economic pressure. For example, the kind of number of executions in China, you cannot control it, because they have a system of law. And you cannot say that their system of law, there is no system of law, but that system of law may not be suitable or agreeable as what it is happening in other parts of the world. But it is still existing. Therefore, in case of Taliban, unlike China, China has huge resources at their disposal. They can still survive with any kind of economic sanctions coming. They would still, they're the second largest economic power also. Also, one has to remember that the Soviet Union, when it was established, many international powers did not accept it for a long time. US, for example, did not recognize it for almost a decade. But they had a huge territory from Balkans at one side and the other side it was the Pacific. And there are natural resources available. For example, in one part of the country, the nation, they did not have something. In some other parts of the big nation that they had, for example, from Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or Kazakhstan, they could bring in resources and resources could be built up, and they had a strong national setup which made the fiber plants, and industrialization was built up at that time, and the nation building was happening. So they created wealth within. Afghanistan has no such possibilities. So therefore, it may be comparatively easy to pressurize these people unless they become completely blind about the situation and even allow their people to completely starve and the government failing. They want to become anyway martyrs, and they would continue it till they would finally fall naturally. If that is a possibility, still it can take 10 years, it can take 5 years, it can take 20 years, who knows. But there should be a change, and there has to be a change, and there will be a change, and Afghanistan will come back to into the modern world. But what would be the praise that we give is the major important thing. Now the third strategy is known as the bouncing of rock bottom. That's how the strategy is called. There the Western forces or the outside world has to use force, blow up with a set of attack, then negotiate, and then force them to come to terms with things. So they want to survive as a government, as a ruling structure, but whenever they go violently against that, show the power to change it. Instead of attacking the whole people, but their centers can be attacked if they go totally against the human rights, and if they're violating the human rights of all those people there, that can be seriously taken as a matter of an offense, and there can be their actions bounce back to them should be what they should understand. If they are keeping the people in terror, and if fear is the key of their rule or regime or their authority, even at this moment they don't have a government, but it's very clear that they will form a government very soon. But at the same time, in the same coin, the world nations can give Afghanistan a sense of fear and a sense of hope to those people who are suffering under this regime. Give them hope, give them strength, and the price anyway can be very, very heavy, and a lot of people will suffer. There is no other alternative. In any option, if you just allow Taliban to rule the way they want it, just for life and comfort of people, no, they don't give life and comfort of people. They would give only a brutal, suppressive structure over these people, and they would only give total taking away of human rights, and they would try to implement their brutal, violent laws that probably would exist some 1500 or 1700 years back only. So there is no other option that one has to, without interfering into the situation, that we can change it. That interference should be focusing on what in 20 years of the post-Taliban period. The first Taliban period was over, and there was a period when the Western forces and the world had a control on Afghanistan. What they failed to do at that time was empowering the people, giving strength to the people, not only in Kabul but all over the country, to develop, to stand up, and to get courage and to speak for their rights. Give them strength and encourage them to come up with new ideas and new patterns of organization and a new leadership that should emerge from Afghanistan. In a way, instead of occupying Kabul, if we wanted to save Kabul from these people, they should have enriched the capacity of people. They should have developed a new human resource pattern in Afghanistan. They should have built up a powerful new leadership emerging. Any leadership would fail when they don't understand what has to follow them. If any leadership does not recognize the importance of the next generation's leadership, they're bound to fail. Any leader should think about what would come after him and after him. A new set of leaders had to be trained and brought up. That is what probably they should have done. They should have equipped people. They should have encouraged people. They should have developed people. They should have developed human resources, and they should have developed capacities all around Afghanistan. And if there was a new leadership, a new pattern of people, and new encouraged, strengthened people all around, Taliban would not have been that easily defeating Afghanistan. Now, that's all over. Back to court one, but still we have this option. With all possible methods that is available with the internet revolution, to reach people with all different methods that we can reach them. With the internet revolution, we have hundreds of different ways to reach out people. So we have to encourage people, we have to enrich their capacities, we have to strengthen them, we have to develop new leadership in the rural areas of Afghanistan. And only with their support, there can be a change in Afghanistan. And that needs international cooperation, international goodwill, international spirit of changing the scene there. Beyond geopolitical interests, beyond strategic interests, beyond the control of the area, the whole world has to come together to change what happened in Afghanistan, because it should not happen in any other part of the world anymore. That's very important, because we have the big casualties that we may have to pay in Afghanistan can be very, very big, much beyond what we would imagine. But with that, a new leadership will emerge in Afghanistan and will change Afghanistan. And that's so important that it shall not be a model for any other part of the world anymore. It shall not be the model for any other extremist groups working in any other part. It shall be a lesson that such methods would not work. It shall be a clear lesson that we cannot take history back, and it has to go forward. Here, beyond ideologies, beyond faith, beyond any kind of consideration, beyond any kind of self-interest, beyond any kind of national interest, the whole world has to come together, and unitedly one has to address this problem and reach out people, enrich them, and make the second Afghan revolution possible by overthrowing this regime of regression. Thank you very much. Now, I would open the meeting for discussions, and those who want to comment on or respond can ask questions.
Thank you very much for this wonderful discourse. Sir, my question is, you have suggested one of the options to fight against Taliban regime as options, sanctions against them. But I'm afraid whether we can see it as an isolated incident in the world, because as a few days back I have seen a video by Parvez Musharraf explaining the Afghan problem by saying that he himself, or the Pakistan, the West and the US have formed a friend to fight against communism and brought more than 10,000 Al-Qaeda fighters from various Muslim countries, more than 15,000 mercenaries from elsewhere, and this Taliban from Afghanistan. So my question is, actually the problem lies in these incidents, that is fighting against communism, because at present, if you see, China is supporting Taliban. So all these countries be able to do anything about this Taliban?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a valid point. But As you all know, Afghanistan was a strategically important part during the Cold War. During the Cold War, there was a balance of power between United States and America. Mainly connected with ideologies officially. But both these powers, which Soviet Union called America as an imperialist force, and America called that as a communist regime where freedom is denied. So they used the slogan freedom. The other people spoke the slogan of free from imperialism. Soviet Union and United States had a strategic interest in Afghanistan. The reason was we had Iran, which was a pro-American force. It was a part of the American allied system during the Shah. And there was a powerful overthrowing of the government by the Muslim groups. If you remember the history, in Iran, the anti-Shah movement was primarily led by the Tudeh party, which I've explained in another meeting earlier. The Tudeh party was the most powerful opposition against the Shah's regime, which was considered an ally of America at that time. So the general expectation everywhere in the world was the Tudeh party would be coming to power. So Tudeh party cooperated with, Tudeh party was the Communist Party of Iran, was cooperating, it was pro-Moscow, and it cooperated with the Islamic radical groups. Without this cooperation, it was impossible to overthrow Shah from power. And what was the interest? The interest was very clear. The Communist Party of Iran would take over the power after that, and that would be a big change in the area. And during Shah's regime, it was of course a pro-Western government, but on the freedom side, women were allowed, unlike in many other countries, they were living with full freedom. There were free enterprises possibilities. There was a lot of nepotism. There was a lot of corruption. And Shah was a kind of a monarch. And that was a system that was not justifiable, but an alternative would have been a democratic revolution, and wherein Shah goes and an open democracy coming up. Nobody knows if Tudeh party came to power that would be possible, because most of the communist parties also did not follow a system where democratic elections were possible. But now it's a post-mortem of the situation. We know that Tudeh party was very powerful, and they have been giving legitimization to the radical Muslim groups at that time, because they found imperialism as the biggest force. In their narrative, imperialism was the biggest force to fight against, and the communists and the Muslim radicals cooperated there. A comparatively non-entity that the Muslim extremism was, which could gather a lot of storm, and a very well-organized political structure that the Communist Party of Iran had. The communist leaders always thought that we have a network of organization, we have party cells and party units and a big network, and we have the support of Soviet Union, and we would get our legitimized support of the people by encouraging the Muslim forces, but we'll be able to control them. That was their calculation. But the calculation went wrong, because the major leader of the Muslim radicals, that is Ayatollah Khomeini, who was not in Iran, he was in Paris. He was in a kind of exile in Paris, and he was leading the movement from there. He was making, those times, the tapes, he was making audio tapes and smuggling through different people to, Iran, and has been promoting his ideas at the time. But once Shah was, the Shah regime was going, not because of the communist uprising, but because of the Islamic uprising, and the American embassy was seized. And at the end of the day, there was a huge Islamic uprising which was supported by the Communist Party, the Tudeh party. And everyone thought that the communists are coming to power in the beginning with the support of the Muslim radicals. But what happened was different. The Ayatollah Khomeini returns, and he had huge mass appeal, and they could capture power. And well, Shah has gone, and there will be a new election coming. They thought all the political opponents of the combined momentum of the communists as well as the Islamic radicals were all eliminated. They were all executed first. Then a new allegation came against the communists, that they tried to overthrow the government of Ayatollah Khomeini, and all their leaders were arrested. And after 6 months, and after summary trial, all of them were executed. Now there is no active Communist Party, not even for my namesake, in Iran. That was one scene happening in Iran, the immediate neighborhood of Afghanistan. So the next scene of conflict was Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, there have been British rule long back, and Afghanistan is one of those countries who got independence first back in 1919. And after a long time, there have been more and more, they had education, they had freedom of women, and they have been inspired by Turkey and the Turkish Revolution. All these kind of things were happening in Afghanistan. They have been one of the most developed parts of the Muslim world at one time. But eventually, there was an interest of the then Soviet Union. I'm speaking not on ideology. I speak about this area and this period because, that has been my specialization for my doctoral research, and I know about that period also. Soviet Union had a geopolitical and strategic interest in Afghanistan because they have been advancing to the sea. Soviet Union has a strategic problem, a military strategic problem, because they didn't have any open sea without snow during the winter. So if they have an access to Karachi or in Pakistan to the sea, their strategic position would be much advanced. For that, they would need to advance further and then either get Pakistan on their side or dismember Pakistan. That was their interest. And strategically, their movement was very clearly analyzed by all strategic experts everywhere, and this was countered. And when the regime of Najibullah was coming to Afghanistan, Najibullah was a highly educated person. He was pro-Moscow. He was trained in Moscow, and he was trained especially by KGB. He was pro-Moscow, but the system was comparatively liberal, one has to say. And there was freedom, there was a new regime, there was a new set of rules, everything was there. So US found it not because of all these kind of changes. This is where I said that the interest of nations and interest of ideology or interest of geopolitical desires sometimes overtake the general welfare of the situation. And what happened was very clear, that the resistance movement against Najibullah was promoted by United States. Very clearly it was promoted by United States because they wanted to stop the advancement of Soviet Union towards, through Central Asia to South Asia. And the Soviet Union was making a balance between India and Pakistan. If you know that the Pillai steel plant was given to India, simultaneously they were given the Karachi steel plant to Pakistan also. They've been negotiating between India and Pakistan. When India and Pakistan were in a war, and if you remember, Lal Bahadur Shastri was invited to Tashkent, and they have been making a negotiation under the Soviet guidance. And that was a clear show of their strategic interest in the whole area, long back also. But eventually, what one sees is that the Soviet influence was to be reduced by American interests. I don't say what is right or wrong here, but purely when we see things after the situation, we have to see what happened at that time. So this was, overthrowing of Najibullah was the worst mistake that has been done in Afghanistan. He had a legitimately elected government that was overthrown in such a brutal way. He wanted to escape to India, but he was caught and hanged on a lamppost. And that is how Taliban take over the power. That was in the interest of stopping Soviet Union's advancement. So both the superpowers had an interest in Afghanistan, but things went out of their control. Because when you want to have a little gain out of such a situation strategically, you are paying a huge price for the life of people who are living there. So that is what has happened. Both Soviet Union and United States had an interest, and there it was a theater of their conflict. And as you rightly said, will the world nations, now there is no communism, there is no communist leadership in Soviet Union, there is no Cold War per se between Russia and USA also. Now the economic status of Soviet Union there is no Soviet Union, Russia has declined, and China has emerged as the second economic power and a very strong military power, which did not have any interest in this area or did not have any control in this area, or they were not a big player in this area. But as you all very well know, before the collapse of Kabul, they got the strength and money and support from China, is very clear, via Pakistan. And several weeks before the present collapse of Kabul, the Afghan leaders, the Taliban leaders, not Afghan leaders, the Taliban leaders were in Beijing talking to the top communist leaders And one of the promises that the Chinese authorities asked the Taliban leaders, not the Afghan leaders, is that Afghanistan shall not be a place of any arsenal aiming at China. It cannot be a strategic position against Chinese interests. This was guaranteed by the Taliban representatives before they captured Kabul. On the other side, China wanted that there is a small resistance group of Muslims in one part of China, and Taliban would not interfere into that. It was mutually agreed. That was well reported at that time. After that, suddenly one sees a lot of weapons go to all these mercenary groups, and they all get suddenly a lot of strength and courage, and they would be able to move into Kabul very easily. And it's very clearly internationally assessed already that though China did not directly do it, there was a lot of support flown from China, was very clear. And also, after Kabul was taken over, China made a very interesting statement. All these brutalities were going on the outskirts of Kabul, and China said that the Taliban forces should take control of the fringe groups doing outside, so that your name is not tarnished by their acts. As a great brother advising the younger brother how you should behave to get international public opinion in your favor. So China has an interest. China may be a hindrance in any international action against Kabul or Taliban, because UN did not make any kind of a resolution or anything very seriously. It cannot do till there is a regime there to recognize or not. But one doubts if China would veto it on some technical grounds, and can have also Russia a certain interest in this area. So Russia and China shows their interest in this area because it's strategically important, geopolitically important, because it's a center point of the one side, the West Asia, Iran, and Central Asia. Strategically, it's interesting for Soviet Union because their allies, the former Soviet republics, now independent nations, are all around Afghanistan. So these are potential dangers. Beyond international interest for the people of Afghanistan, this kind of national interest can work. Also, I have a lot of reservations about sanctions, which can strangulate the life of people, to make them more hungry, more suffering, and more deaths. But what's the solution? That's why I said whatever option, out of these three options which I have discussed, whatever options that are coming, the price that we are going to pay is very heavy with the lives of these people. And misery cannot be avoided. Anyway, that opened up a new area of discussion. Thank you for bringing that into attention. Thank you very much. Now we go to Sunil PR.
Good evening, sir. I have a couple of questions. The first is strangulating a country economically. It only works when the ruler or the ruling dispensation cares about the population. Like North Korea has been a country which has faced several embargoes, but they still find money to test missiles, develop their nuclear weapons. And weaponry-wise, they may not be behind South Korea or any other similarly, or even maybe even more advanced. And the ruling class is well-fed and never in discomfort. So you can make the people's lives even more miserable, but it may not change the ruling dispensation's mind, because it ruling dispensation, as I said, needs a conscience. That is question number one. Question number two is, as I understand from my reading, Afghanistan is divided along different, there's a kind of tribalism over there based on geographical locations, based on different subsects. So what they have is warlords over there. Whenever there has been peace, even then the warlords had a lot of say over there. So that is why there was some discontent among the population about the way the warlords behaved, the way they extracted money, set up checkposts. This is from my reading. So how can we trust these people to organize a resistance against Taliban? Because these are the people on the ground who have some kind of motivation or some kind of training with armed resistance. Can these groups be trusted to bring back ruling dispensation in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Yeah, very, very, very good thoughts. You are well read about the situation. Number one, I don't propose that strangulating the country with stopping the resources for them. I've been discussing only what the strategic world is considering as 3 or 4 different options. I don't advocate that position. I would advocate building up resistance forces against, which comes into a second question. The first question has huge casualties, more than whether it fail or not. That's still another question which we have to consider. You rightly pointed out the example of North Korea. Despite the whole sanctions, of course, we all know that, again, China has been a big supporter of North Korea. And also one has to understand that North Korea has a huge natural resource pool in their country. So if people go into North Korea, you don't see that people are starving or anything. They have huge buildings and they have their infrastructure. They can produce a lot of things. And they are a kind of a blindfolded set of people who are totally in praise of their leadership, or maybe they have no other option. If anybody raises any challenge against their leadership, they will be simply shot down or eliminated. So in other situation, they have a strong military. They could invest a lot of money in developing weaponry which could even threaten the security of United States of America. So that is one possibility. If any country give weapons and money to the Taliban regime, they would be able to control more weapons. And also there is another danger, which is very possible, that in Pakistan there are Taliban groups. There can be another Taliban uprising in Pakistan. That cannot be ruled out, because most of the Pakistan authorities, most of the Pakistan elite are controlling their country by taking favorable positions towards the extremist groups and their ideology. Even Imran Khan speaks in favor of the radical groups there. And also, the military has an important role in Pakistan, unlike other countries in South Asia. Military is an ingredient part of the decision making in Pakistan. The moment military can win, or the Taliban of Pakistan can win a section of the military leadership, it can alter the whole situation. You have seen it in history. During Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, when Ziaul Haq, his most trusted army officer, took over the power, he was controlling a real power because he was elected as the president. But the radical forces have asked 2 things to give support to Ziaul Haq. Number 1, execution of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And number 2, that they would want Nizam-e-Mustafa. That's a kind of Islamic rule run by the Sharia, fundamental Sharia structures. He has started already Mustafa, and then he executed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto on a trivial case. Trivial case in the sense that some opposition leader who was opposing Zulfikar Ali Bhutto died in a car accident that was taken as a conspiracy, and the accident was actually secretly operated by the Pakistan secret force with the advice of Bhutto, was the allegation, and he was executed for that. This was tried in Pakistan at that time. Of course, it did not go in that way. Still they had elections, the military has still power, the radical forces are still there, but there is Taliban, and there is a lot of people in the military who would support not only Taliban, but the movement like Al-Qaeda, which got a lot of support from the Taliban. The cadre came from Taliban, and even Osama bin Laden was in the military area of Pakistan. So imagine a situation that in Pakistan there is a change. So it can expand further. One possibility is that strangulating the whole country by starving the people would be a very hard decision. The suffering people would be, it's crores of people. Several millions of people would be suffering with that process. I would not personally, if you ask me, if that was a choice, I would not agree for suffering of people in any situation. But will they have a less suffering life under Taliban? No. There won't be any infrastructure developing because they are more and more interested in implementing their religious laws, and the life where there is no infrastructure or regional structures, their life will be still under misery. And you rightly said about the power of the warlords or the tribal heads or opium lords. That's the correct word they want to use about them. Their major source of income now is opium, which is illegal. But they are controlling the real economy of Afghanistan. Whomsoever is winning the opium lords is winning Afghanistan, is what generally said. Now, many of the opium lords are supporting the Taliban. They have army, mercenaries. So mercenaries can be given to anybody who gives them money. And mercenaries are built up because they have money from opium. So this is a vicious circle. So if you cannot, unless and until during this last 20 years, why did not the so-called democratic forces try to stop the influence of these so-called warlords or tribal chiefs or opium leaders and build up instead a democratic pattern? They did not concentrate on that. They have been building up Kabul as a model place. So winning these opium lords is not a solution, but building resistance against these opium lords and their mercenaries could be the best way, because the local Taliban is controlled by, as you rightly mentioned, by these opium lords. The interpretations given by, the fatwas given by various religious leaders locally are as per the wishes of these opium lords or the tribal chiefs. Who should be executed, who should be killed, who will be stoned to death, whose hand should be cut off, are ordered by the opium lords, and the implementers are the lumpen groups who are doing it in the name of religion. The real control is in the hands of the opium lords. So they have to be identified as the negative forces in the society, and the effort should be to eliminate their influence, not by using them, because that is what the earlier governments tried. During the so-called democratic period, they tried to win the opium lords against other opium lords. They tried to build up clashes and tried to control the situation. That did not work, because when they had more money, and they were brutal negotiators for their interest, and they continued their effort, and they are still powerful. Now they are with the Taliban, and later with another government they will go with them, but they will continue their influence. So out of the three strategies that we discussed, I would still advise that we have to use the modern communication methods to reach out people, and eventually we should build up a resistance movement without having more suffering to people, the least suffering that we cannot judge at this moment. It's a process. In that process, new strategies have to be formulated eventually. It should be very flexible, but the target should be enriching people or building up people, building up a new leadership. As I rightly said earlier, I think that's the correct position in any situation, that anywhere, in any given society, in any given organization, in any given movement, the future has to be ensured by building up new people, able people, capable people, build them up, and new leadership with new capacities. And that is to be built up for the future. If that is built up, that movement will survive and continue. If one fails to build up a new leadership, if you fail to enrich the capacities of the new generation coming to take up things, it will collapse. The democratic movement did not build up new leaders, did not enrich them, did not give them the capacity. They were not officially promoted to become powerful leaders because they wanted to avoid a new leadership coming. That's leadership with less confidence. Leadership with confidence, who is thinking about the future, should build up new leaders. And that is what they failed to do, and that is what we have to do now. Of course, strangulating may not work, as you rightly said. That's a strategy which is being considered. That's in that context only I spoke about it. Thank you very much for that thought, and thank you that you are very well read about the situation.
Sir, I just want to talk about Kerala. After when the Taliban regime was there in Afghanistan, all was talking about India's threat will be Kashmir and Kerala. For Taliban will be a threat for especially to Kashmir and Kerala. So now there is a situation. It's not in social media. Some tensions is rising. We in Kerala, as you know, we have got a better communal harmony. But now some tensions is rising because, as you know, some Taliban supporters. Some has quoted that in Kerala there is more supporters than Afghanistan for Taliban. So if such comments is going on, there is another thing just relating the same thing is about a film. I think, not one film, two films, Keshu, Veer Rakshagan, and Yeshu not from Bible, such things. So the High Court has given a verdict that we are not going to interfere in the freedom of expression or something. So now there is a Christian extreme sect. I think it's a youth sect. In social media, they are active. They have made a short film that is Muhammad, the Poxo criminal. So now this fight is going on in social media. Maybe I think it's a threat for communal harmony for Kerala. The same time, what's your opinion about why in Kerala there is too much Taliban supporters?
Yeah, I think, though that's not directly connected with the topic that we are discussing today, I would briefly mention, since you have asked, because as an important problem connected with Afghanistan. I come from Kerala by my birth, though I was not living in Kerala, and I'm very closely following the Kerala political scene. And for those people who are not familiar with the Kerala situation, Kerala is one of the most literate state in India, and which brings in one of the highest amount of foreign currency to Indian economy by a lot of Keralites. Half the Keralites are living in other parts of the world, including United States, Germany, and Saudi Arabia. They are going and working other places and sending back money, and that's a major foreign exchange revenue of India also. Kerala is politically very active, but also, if you see the rationalist movement, one of the most powerful rationalist movement in the whole of country could be, not only Kerala, but Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Punjab. If you take 4 or 5 states, Kerala is one amongst them very prominently. So what he mentions, I would make it very briefly, what it is. There is a strong support in favor of the Taliban in Kerala. There is a newspaper in Kerala run by Jamaat-e-Islami. That's a Muslim group in India. Jamaat-e-Islami is a political movement, started by Maududi in 1941, which speaks about a universal Islam where the national boundaries are not there. Muslims are a nation. That's the kind of ideology that they have, generally very, very fanatic in their positions. And the Indian Jamaat-e-Islami claims that they are not exactly like the Jamaat-e-Islami of Pakistan, but to everybody's surprise, they have officially supported the Taliban capturing Kabul, and they are defending it. They have a television in Kerala. So therefore, this newspaper and the television can influence a major section of Kerala's public opinion. Kerala has 20% Muslims. Kerala has around 30 million, so we call it, 30 million people, and of which 20% are Muslims. But there could be more Muslim population in Kerala, because Kerala is a place where the labor is very, very, lucratively paid, because most of the educated Keralites or employable Keralites are working away, and per day's payment or per month's payment for any kind of work is the highest in Kerala. Therefore, from all over India, there is a migration to Kerala to get better jobs. Like people migrate to America or Germany or something like that. In places from West Bengal and all these places. And amongst them could be a lot of people, Bengali speaking people could be migrants from Bangladesh who would contribute to the idea of radicalism and extremism. So this 20% of Muslims can be still more if you consider the migrant Muslim population who would be supporting Islam. But the most important factor there in Kerala is, Kerala has a Muslim League, a political party, which is a comparatively liberal party concerning to these radical groups. There is one very radical Muslim group which has less than 5% of the support of the total Muslims. The major Muslim party did not even make a public call after the Ayodhya demolition. They are more liberal. Though they are conservatives, reactionary in their faith and structures, they are not calling for violence, they are not supporting all these radical positions, and they are a kind of a moderate set of Muslims. And they have the largest influence in Kerala society. But in Kerala, one sees a very interesting thing. This is an impact of Taliban in India. In Kerala, there is a set of people which is generally, I've seen international articles doubting about the intention of the radical Muslim groups in Kerala, that it could be leading towards an effort to make a small Muslim emirate in northern Kerala. There's been doubts about that by many people, that they are trying for that. So there is, to add to the whole conflict now, there is a radical set of Christians emerging, speaking the same language of Taliban. Interestingly, the majority of Christians in Kerala, they are again another 20% of Kerala's population. They are mainly traders. Even the Muslim population, both in Muslim population as well as the Christian population in Kerala, are not very religiously inclined, majority of them. They are living a good life. Many of them are traders, and they are, part of the system and not into any kind of extremism. But now what we see is a set of extremists coming up in the Muslim community, coming up with the very radical slogans, and a set of Christian fundamentalists coming up, using against very radical slogans. For example, I know that many of my friends who are on Clubhouse, which is a very popular social media platform in Kerala, I also appear very regularly there, and normally one would talk to thousands of people in these kind of meetings. If anybody criticizes Christianity in any form, they would get third-class abuses in their private email. The same with Muslims. So these are sent by a set of people, very small number of people. One can ignore it, but what one sees is that the promotion of escalation of conflicting tone, these people are using. They're not angry towards the critics of religion like the rationalists are. The Christian radicals are attacking the Muslims, and the whole Muslims. They're telling that all Muslims are sleeping cells of terrorism, and Islam, and if you're a Muslim, you are a terrorist and you are a danger to the country. And on the other side, the radical Muslims speak the same language against these people. There is abuse and third-rate languages and uncivilized conversations on the social media in Kerala now. It's fight between two radical, fanatic, unacceptably intolerant set of people, one from the Christian extremism and the other from the Islamic extremism. So this conflict is to be handled, and people like me who speak Malayalam language, I am trying to speak publicly, separating extremism and faith. I would oppose faith also. I would respect their right to speak, defending their faith also. But extremism is something which everybody has to condemn totally and together. So awakening the Kerala community against all kinds of extremism is the biggest responsibility at this moment for anybody who is socially concerned in Kerala. And I can say that since you're from Kerala, you must be knowing that, how active I am. Spending how many evenings to talking to Kerala groups. Thousands of them every evening, in different social media platforms. So this is a serious problem. And this is another problem of the success of Taliban in Afghanistan. You probably would see in the coming years, there are many radical groups getting inspired by the success of these radical groups, who would be thinking that they could also achieve similar proximity to power or grab power without mass support, but with the support of weapons. As you all know that in Afghanistan, Taliban has no mass support. They have no support of the people, but they have power because they have weapons. They have power because they have supporting international forces behind them. And they have support, they have strength because the warlords who collect a lot of money from illegal means and by selling opium illegally to the world market. So similarly, if such similar groups are getting inspired in different other parts of the world, for them also, the important lesson that we have to tell is that no, this is not a victory of an ideology. This is a victory of extremism because the people who were for democracy were not alert enough to build up able leadership to counter it. So that could be the answer for any other place, whether it is Kashmir, whether it is Kerala or many other, whether it is Eastern Bihar, where all these radical groups are active, this has to be answered by a civil society, by a responsible society, not in their language, but in a civilized language, by educating people. There can be a lot of extremist groups getting inspired from Taliban, and that we have to address. World is full of challenges. We have to take up these challenges. Thank you anyway for bringing that into public notice. And now we go to Dr. Ashok Kumar.
Sir, I'm Dr. Ashok Kumar, psychiatrist from Kadapa,
Yes.
Andhra Pradesh, India. The thing is, there are different opinions on communist strategies and your strategies. You being rationalists, you are against Taliban. Yes. What about your ideology about Indian Talibanism, Hindu Talibanism? Because Hindu Talibanism exists since thousands of years in India. In fact, they have massacred Buddhists. They have made entire country. They have almost terminated Buddhists from other countries. In fact, they have established Hinduism in India. In fact, Taliban gurus are Indians only, Indian Hindus only, because they have destroyed entire Buddhist type of ideologies, Charvaka type of ideologies. That's why Talibanism is not new to the world. Probably they may be new to the Arab world, but it is not new to the India. India is already practicing Talibanism in India because so many these Brahminical people, they have almost warred with declared war with Buddhism, and they have almost entirely time escape. That means throw away from Indian soil, especially probably from some south area only. North India Buddhism almost disappeared. That's why, in fact, religion has got two phases. One is empathic, mental health, ethics, all this one phase. The other phase is dangerous phase, terrorism, intolerance, because destroying other faiths, other these things. Because these India is suffering from already what I mean intolerance, and because you might have noticed in Delhi, because this Hindutva people completely declared war with certain pockets of Muslims of Delhi. You might have noted here in this thing. In fact, as a reasonist, what advice you want to give communists? Because communists now they have in China, they have got full political power, full freedom of what they were doing. They want to eradicate religions from the Chinese soil. Do you support such type of things? You cry with human rights cry that Chinese violating human rights of Muslims, all these things. But the same Muslims, Hindus, all this, whatever it may be in India, they have got the other face, terrorism. What is your answer, advice to the communists, sir?
So, Dr. Ashok Kumar, I mean, how would I advise the communists? Because I'm not a communist by principle. I mean, I don't follow or I don't adhere to the ideology of communism. But I consider Indian communists, if we speak about Indian communists, as people who are in the democratic path. See, communists are to be divided into two different things. Primarily, there are two types of communists. The fundamental idea of revolution by a bloodshed, even by overthrowing a power, which is even democratic electorally or in other forms existing, is one form of communism, which we have seen in many parts of the world earlier, or as an ideological position earlier, which I would not approve. Also, I would not approve what has been implemented in the earlier Soviet Union during Stalin's time, that the media was completely suppressed and any kind of ideas being expressed was stopped. So freedom as the greatest value, I would not approve that way of ruling, number two. Number three, the fundamental dogmatic position of communism is not appealing to me, to my scientific sense. But that doesn't mean that I have a problem with communists, because Indian communists are a reformed group. They are many of the top Indian communist leaders are very close friends of mine, including Prakash Kairat and Sitaram Yechury. Yechury is my university mate, and we talk occasionally. My daughter and his daughter also studied in the same university almost at the same time. We have a very close relationship. But all the same, my position is very clear about the Indian communists. I would say that they are democratic parties. They are contesting the elections. They are trying to use, whenever they are in power, they are trying to use democratic means in a legitimate way to give, like any other political party. It's like any other social democratic party or something like that in other parts of the world, without much difference. For example, in Kerala, there were many times communist parties coming to power. They did not try to stop the press. They did not suppress people. They were like other parties coming to power. They have been part of or sharing with or supporting central power, and they were not for any kind of radical position which would be jeopardize the democratic structure. So as far as we know now, of course, there was a position during the Calcutta thesis. They have been asking for a bloody revolution at one time, but now the Indian Communist parties are a reformed group. We are in there who are in the democratic process. Therefore, we should not have any problem with cooperating with them without coming to their dogma. Like I don't have any political affiliation. I'm friendly with all people in politics. At the same time, I would have the right to criticize their positions, and I would like to encourage any position that is going in the right direction. No matter which party they belong to. That's my approach to things. Now coming to the exact point. Historically, Taliban is a set of students who were inspired by the teachings of Quran. That is why Taliban is an Arabic word. Mainly meant as students, the religious students. So it was not religious students who made problem in the past of India. Of course, Buddhism was cornered and was attacked by not only in India but also in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, if you know, the Bamiyan Buddhist statues show that it was a great center of Buddhism at one time. It was a center of Hinduism at another time. Now it has been they were all eliminated now. They are not there now. Because in earlier times, in medieval times especially, or before the ancient times also, the general tendency is that if one religion or one emperor comes to power, all other people would follow his faith or they will not survive there. That was the general policy everywhere in the world. Even in Roman Empire, in Greek Empire, everywhere you see this kind of approach. Even during the Crusades, when Spanish Empire, when Granada was defeated, all the people, they were only Muslims and Jews in Granada at that time. And after now, some years back, I've been in Granada. There's not a single Jew, a single Muslim living in Granada town at that time. All were Catholics, though they were not practicing Catholicism. So that has been an old practice everywhere in the world. And nobody would approve the ancient annihilations, ancient brutality, or ancient suppressions. But we cannot revenge on people. We cannot keep grudge in our mind now in this context today about something has happened 1,000 years back or 500 years back or 2,000 years back. If there are any mistakes done, if it's in the proximity of correction, we can try that. Buddhism was once powerful in India. Now it's not a powerful force in India. We cannot reinstate Buddhism back, and we should not even try that because there was something done against Buddhism in the past. Who has done and how it is done, of course, historians dispute. But can we reverse the situation? Can we reverse the situation? Buddhism was very powerful in Afghanistan. Do we want Buddhism back and remove all the people from the present faith to Buddhism? No, we cannot reverse history. History has happened. We study lessons from history. But there is no point in keeping grudges from history. If some mischief has been done in the past, some cruelty has been done in the past, some kind of a brutality has been done in the past, 1,000 years back or 500 years back, we should not keep that grudge and express that grudge to other people of this time. We have to live here and now. And if anything is happening now, of course, we have to take. I would say that the biggest dispute that I have with Hinduism is not their past. Because the same thing has been done, for example, Vaishnavites and Shaivites. There was no Hinduism at that time. They fought each other for centuries. Shakta worshippers and Shaivites, they fought each other. Now they have a common theology. If you call that theology, a common ideology that brings everything and all including. But all the same, I know about the radical uprising in Hinduism. and the radical elements in Hinduism growing very fast, the cow vigilantes who are making a havoc in the country, the kind of fanatic groups like Sanatan Sanstha hunting rationalists and killing them, all I'm aware. But if Sanatan Sanstha something done to my closest friend Narendra Dabolkar, who talked to me even 4 days before his assassination, or many other rationalist colleagues whom I knew very personally when they were hunted down, I would not keep a grudge against all the Hindus for that. That was a sect that has been done. They have to be identified. They have to be arrested. They have to be punished for that. If I keep my grudge towards the whole Hindus because some Hindu fanatic has done something, I would be wrong like any other religious fanatic. I would not have that. Once the RSS magazine organizer wanted an interview with me. Some years back after I came to Finland. When they asked for an interview, I was taken to surprise. I suggested them, I would give you an interview provided you would not cut any part what I speak. They said, guaranteed. And if any part is for editorial reasons they cut, they would show me. To my surprise, they published the interview without any kind of editing. I also said that if you ask about any other religion, do not forget to ask a similar question about Hinduism and my views about Hinduism. And they have done that. And when they asked about Hinduism, I said, the biggest mistake of Hinduism that I see is its contribution towards the caste system or the justification of the caste system, which is one of the most cruel system that ever existed in human civilization. But you have to remember that no top Hindu leader of any sort, any party, whomsoever party is, they may be practicing caste system, they may be secretly admiring caste system, they may be secretly wanting to get benefit out of caste system, but nobody has the courage to defend the hierarchical caste system and its all-day structure, and they would never speak to bring it back to the contemporary world as it was happening in the past. Officially, they say that there should be discrimination should go. At least officially, they are all forced to speak that caste discrimination should go. That's a big advantage than what was existing 200 years back. Even Gandhi defended caste system in its earlier writings. But later you see that Gandhi has been denouncing caste system and fighting against caste system. So that has been a transforming period in India. But I would say that the discriminations and all these conflicts should go, but you cannot compare India with Taliban. Because India is a democracy. You may not like the present governance. You may not like the present political parties in power. And you may like it, you may not like it, that's a different question. But all of them are functioning under a democratically elected system. You have a right to overthrow any government by a democratic election. There's a clear separation of judiciary, executive, and the parliament. There are elected parliaments. It's a decentralized democracy. You have from the local groups onwards, you have democracy. You can participate in it. You can become a part of the changing of the system or administering the system by criticizing any government, any ideology, and you can still be there if you have the people's support. So how can you compare India with the Taliban? No, there can be radical groups like Taliban in India. From any religion, such groups can be there. And there are Christian fanatic groups in Mumbai, who were hunting for my life, and I had to run away from India because of that. And there are similar fanatic Muslim groups in India and similarly fanatic Hindu groups in India. But that is not the mainstream yet in India. We have to recognize that. We should understand these extremists at one side, and we should not keep any revenge taking issues from centuries back or millennia back. That's my position on that. All the injustice, all the extremism, all the intolerance we have to fight together of all sorts from wherever it comes. But from standing on a secular platform, standing on a platform of reason and common sense, standing on a platform of civil sense, standing on a platform of civil rights, standing on a platform of freedom of expression, freedom of right, standing on a platform of human rights. That should be the position that we should follow. Anyway, thank you very much for that concern. I understand that. Thank you very much. Now I would go to Ratish.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, actually, if you go for this one triangulation in Afghanistan, don't you think it will go to a civil war there? fighting two groups each other. Could you, better option is either a UN or NATO intervention. Anyway, UN intervention cannot be possible because either China or Russia will veto it. But I did suggest for this one, what do you call, NATO intervention to clear off they have hardly 40,000 people over the Taliban. And this NATO has their sophisticated weapons, bombers, and all those things. In a week's time, we can clear it off as far as. But that's an option. It's my question. Could it be a NATO intervention will be a better option than any of our other things?
See, one option could be NATO intervention, but the problem there is NATO has also a vested interest. The problem is if their intention is to bring in democracy and self-rule in a democratic way, that would be correct. But NATO intervention, if it is again if the local population can be convinced by this Taliban group that this is an intervention to steal our resources, to control our country, that would immediately be distanced by the local population because they are also not politically very aware people. So NATO intervention could be very selective, but it should be supported by external forces. But in my view, that's of course one would think that, a civil war should be avoided. I would say that, there is not much options we have. There can be big casualties in Afghanistan for sure. There can be a lot of misery that's going to happen in Afghanistan, though nobody would want it. There will be a lot of hunger. There is already poverty. There will be more poverty. There will be more malnutrition. There will be more suffering. There will be more tragedies in Afghanistan from both sides, from the economic side as well as from the brutality of these warlords who are in the guise of Taliban. So building up a resistance force from within and supported from outside would be the most feasible thing, but it won't work immediately. NATO or other there can be an international format, which will be coming with a clear goal, which can support and enrich these local people. That could be one solution. But that may be just a wishful thinking of me. But eventually, United Nations directly sanctioning these people, as we rightly said, that sometimes it may not function, it may not work, because it can be vetoed. And even if it is not vetoed or a much modified resolution is passed, still it can be sidelined or it can be not properly implemented if China and Russia wants it or Pakistan wants it. North Korea, there's a lot of sanctions coming, but of course, many of them were stopped also by vetoes, and sometimes it did not work also. Iran, there were sanctions, but Iran still survived. But unlike Iran, Afghanistan has a limitation that Iran has an administration and infrastructure where Afghanistan does not have it. It does not have even roads. It does not have a communication system properly. It does not have electricity supply properly. So it's a kind of a totally underdeveloped world outside the center of Kabul. So of course, NATO can be one possibility, but I'm always afraid about the vested interest of the political forces with their geopolitical interest there. That can be a hindrance. But still, we would think about anything now, because such bad is the situation there in Afghanistan. Thank you for that thought. Now, shall I ask Sajish to speak?
Hi, nice to see you, Sanal, again. Actually, I started from my younger period. From your I subscribed almost all the IAP publications, and I was a subscriber of Terali at the time. And after that, you left India and all. But I'm very happy that even in the voiceover versions, clubhouses, and you are active and closely associating and participating you and all. Even coming back to the Taliban, Afghanistan issue, and you are very well even in the last talk, and you are very clearly mentioned the politics there. My question is as two parts, and mainly the first part is that we know that from the Tariqi government onwards, there was a left. I'm not a communist, but I'm a leftist. But so that we have a left group actively there, even though they were communists, they are in the power. So there may be some left group, at least they're in the Kabul. And for the 20 years, because of the Western American invasion, they got especially ladies, they got girls, they are literate, and they got at least 20 or 25-year-old young generation is literate, and there is a democratic possibility of democratic things, and there may be some lefties left there. So my question is that what you have any first-hand information or your intuitions about the plans of democratic and the left movements there in the Afghanistan scenario? And internationally, is there any possibility that democracy is, because you very clearly mentioned that all of them have a geopolitical vested interest. But I'm mainly concentrating on what is the position of the left movements there. Another point is that my friend Sunil also is mentioning that this negotiating with the warlords, but everything has a difficult scenario. Just implementing the democracy is not possible there. But still, likewise, China and Russia are very powerful and very good contact with Taliban, so that the left and communist has got any negotiation with them, or like you already you mentioned your Today party, if you they got alliance with the Taliban, they're the fate of the Today party. So I'm stopping that. What is the position of the left, which is left there?
I can confirm that I have several Afghan friends who are in Europe, and through them I have a communication, first-hand information about the situation of Afghanistan, because many of their relatives are in Afghanistan. So I have at least some 20-25 people who are from Afghanistan in my network, from where I get a lot of information, who support the Rationalist movement, who are part of the network of Rationalist International. So that is, with that is one of the major information source I have, apart from the media that is, giving one share of ideas, because I have first-hand information from Afghanistan. So with that, I can very clearly say that there is no left movement left in Afghanistan. There is nothing of that sort that we know. But what we call left in Afghanistan is the so-called liberals, for example, who would speak for gender justice. There is an old lady of 70 years who came out and said that she would remain there, she would not go there, but fight and make resistance against that to ensure that women live in peace and equality. But of course, she's 70 years old, and how long she would be able to speak, it's not very clear. Even yesterday, there was an uprising of women which was suppressed brutally. So there is not much of left back there in Afghanistan, but the broad liberal forces, that's what we are speaking about. That's the only thing we can still think about. And they are the people who try to escape from Afghanistan. In the regional level, in the local areas, outside Kabul, outside Kandahar, there is not much people who would speak. That's what I was speaking about, the lack of leadership emerging locally. There is not much people, they are all afraid lords, mainly under the control of the tribal lords, the warlords, or the opium lords as we can call them. And a dozen of them major controllers, and under them local mafia, or it's exactly like mafiosi working. They are warlords, and anybody is opposing them, they will use guns against them, and it's their control. And the local religious groups are in their control. And they are willing to give them weapons to eliminate any opponent, and they can use religion as a pretext and cover to eliminate their opponents. And most of these murders done by the religious leaders or the Taliban forces are not exactly on the basis of their faith or ideology or anything, but they are not in the good books of the warlords. So in the name of religion, when they are executed publicly or punished, it's also a warning in favor of the warlord. If you stand against the warlord, this is what is waiting for you. But it cannot be even questioned, because that's done by the Taliban religious forces. That's how it functions. That's the correlation between the warlords and the local Taliban. So in this scenario, what we can do would be, in Kabul, there is an educated set of people who wanted to escape, and many of them escaped, and still there are a lot of people. But the so-called middle class who are beneficiaries of the earlier system would eventually go down, because they would be the most afraid set of people. They have to lose many things. They have to lose their career. They have to, in the new system, there should be new jobs, and they want jobs, and they want to survive. So they would immediately shift their loyalties. That was going to happen. As anybody can imagine, the remaining people would immediately shift their loyalties, at least officially, just to survive. Just to survive. Like women who never wanted burqa by their own, and who felt freedom are now running to buy burqa because they think the burqa will protect them not from the bad, evil eyes of men, because men can be attracted if they see their, even the footsteps, men can be attracted. That can even pollute their, purity. But they are simply afraid of the guns, simply afraid of the knives that could chop away their hands or legs, or simply afraid of being publicly stoned. So they go for burqa. That's a protection that they have. Burqa becomes a protection in a way, not in the religious context, but in a real life protection, because if you go under a burqa, you are protected. Unless if you are not captured as a victim of forced marriage, then you are protected. Anyway, the left forces are not there. In Pakistan, there was a left force. You know that, when Pakistan was being formed, the Indian Communist Party at that time supported the idea of Pakistan. They supported the Pakistan resolution. Their thought was, there was a big left movement at that time in Pakistan also. That was a strategic mistake of the whole communist movement in the mid last century, because they all thought that by getting a lot of people getting support from the community Muslim movement, a grand coalition between the Muslims and the left movement would prompt the Muslims to embrace communism. That was the thought. That was the strategy they thought, how to win the areas under the Muslim influence. When Pakistan was formed, not only that the Communist Party supported the Pakistan resolution, they sent one of their topmost ideologues, B.M. Kutty, a person from Kerala whom I also knew because he was a friend of my father, and whenever he came to India, he met us also. I know him also. He told us also, it was also in many interviews, he was asked by the Indian Communist Party to go to Pakistan, to lead the Pakistan Communist Party, to bring in a communist rule in Pakistan. But what happened? Where is the Communist Party in Pakistan now? That area, Lahore, had a huge communist movement. There is no Communist Party now. And B.M. Kutty, when he was retiring from politics, and he is no more now, he said that, there are not even 500 communists secretly admiring communism in Pakistan now. And they all are above 60 years, and they will also wane away very soon. So that's the situation in Pakistan. That's the situation in Afghanistan. So communism, as many people would see in the campuses or in the pockets of communism, is not a political option now in many parts of the Muslim world. So, and secondly, what can happen as a left alliance? No, there is no possibility of a left alliance coming up and taking over Pakistan. And who would support the left movement? There are no communist countries anymore who is interested in the international scene than their geopolitical and economic interests. China. Vietnam is trying to get more and more American work. China is trying hard not to lose the American contracts. And of course, they have geopolitical interests. They have a lot of money, which they are investing not in China, but in America. Most of their money is invested in America. And they are invested in crypto. It's invested in Europe. They are trying to take up projects in Western Europe because it's more lucrative. It's more stable. It's guaranteeing returns. So China is gaining a lot of money, but they are trying to invest that money in Western world and giving more strength to the so-called capitalist society. And the classical capitalist society is nowhere existing in Europe, though most of the places it's social democracy that's existing. But they are trying to invest more and more in the Western world. Their interests are building up their country. They have national interests and national geopolitical interests, which can expand their interests. Even with the Taliban leaders, when they have been making agreement, the only demand that they had was not to allow any warheads in Afghanistan, which is aimed at China. And what is the interest there? The interest is whatever government you have, we have no problem. Rule the way you want and implement whatever you want, but don't allow any weapons against us in Afghanistan. So what is the interest there? Interest is their interest, their military interest, their geopolitical interest, and their strategic interest, their defense interest. And perhaps their economic interest by getting into more control in this area, which they did not have earlier. This was a playground of erstwhile USSR and USA, and then Russia has an interest in the area, but China is a new player in this scene. China is trying to be a player in different parts of the world, but everybody was taken to surprise when they have shown an interest in this area. So beyond that, don't expect too much from the left movement in Afghanistan or this area. We have to think more about the resistance movement based on idea of secularism. No matter if people are interested in communism, no matter they are interested in other forms of economy or anything, that's a matter of economic policies. That can be discussed later. The present interest is fight against darkness, for freedom, for rights, for gender equality, for fundamental human rights. That's much, much beyond than thinking about any economic system or anything. The basic freedom of the individual, that's what we have to guarantee first. That should be the priority also. Thank you anyway for that thought. Now I see two hands. One is IPAT, that's Mrs. Matthews from USA. Please speak.
I thank you for your talk, and I appreciate your dedication, selfless dedication to educate and show the truth in each groups here and yesterday and all clubhouse meets. I don't see anyone else is doing it except you. I think we are all much obliged to that kind of work you are doing. And here on Afghanistan, I think one province never went under Taliban is Panjshir. The Vice President Amarullah Saleh really has a good chance, I think, to start a government organizing all parties. And I also think there is a talk going on, and UK is supporting them. India is also talking to them. I hope that may go ahead and form a government. It's only 5 days gap since the United States left. They may form a government, they fall, and I think they still keep on trying. And then finally, they also have a democratic government, wish and hope. This is all I think everybody want here too. I don't have a question to ask, but because this is what I see, Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that input. I mean, since you are in United States and following closely the US television discussions and all, it's truly, a good position, good point. One of the efforts is to empower the local groups that are surviving. Of course, the vice president is there and the Northern Alliance is one possibility, but the area that is under their control is now very, very limited. But still, that's important that there is a pocket that's still resisting. So enriching that part is one probable way that becomes an alternative center to support local groups that are coming up and empowering the local groups. What a mistake these people have done earlier. 20 years they have been in control of Afghanistan. At that time, if they started educating or re-educating or equipping people or making them new leaders, starting from the people at the age of 20, from 40 years down there will be a great team of brilliant leaders who have great capacities, and their capacities empowered and enriched would be able to take up things. There is no leadership now. If that can be done with the small resistance group possibly at one side, and if they can be used as a spectrum, as a point of fulcrum, to identify different various groups, and like as a spectrum, without insisting on defined positions, if they cooperate with different groups and try to get them intellectually equipped and with the weapons equipped and promote resistance locally, that could be one way of handling. That's the third strategy which we are discussing. And I didn't specifically come to one center because there can be other centers also coming, but glad that it's being discussed openly in US media. Thank you very much for that contribution. Yeah, now I would come to Saptarshi Bhattacharya.
Good evening, sir. Sir, I have few points to ask. Like number one, regarding India. India also has similar concerns about Afghanistan regarding that no harm is done to India from Afghanistan. And the first foreign person they met in Doha was Indian ambassador in Qatar, Mr. Mittal. The Taliban has been talking to him, means they have talked with him. So do you think that going forward, Taliban and India can have a relationship, unlike before when we didn't have a relationship and our plane got hijacked and other terror attacks were also starting from Afghanistan and we had no what will I say, no leverage in Afghanistan. So maybe it can change now. Number two, what I want to understand is Islam. When we say Islamic fundamentalism, now Islam itself is divided into so many sects. So Iran is Shia, then this Afghans are Deobandi, Pakistan is Barelvi, India is Barelvi, which is Sufi. But in Barelvi, also in Pakistan, we are seeing a lot of extremism with Khadim Hussain Rizvi, who was of this Labbaik party. Then, there are so much inner contradictions within Islamic fundamentalism itself. So, maybe all this thing will fall on itself. Means the threat which is there may not be such a big threat, because they will means that the Afghan people will this Afghan Taliban will not get that much capacity to fight actually, because there are so much inner contradiction within their own this Islamic theology. And the third position about rationalism, what I saw some survey, I think Pew survey or Gallup survey, that in Iran maybe 50 to 60% people are non-religious, but because there is anti-apostasy law, they are not coming out openly. So what do you think about non-religious people in Islamic countries? Do you think going forward they can come out and not form a communist government, but form a liberal government, liberal non-religious government? So that is all my questions.
Yeah, good. 3 points. Number one, whether India can take a lead role in the whole structure. Number two, there is conflict between different sects in Afghanistan. Can that fall upon them? And the third, are there secular forces or rationalist forces there, and could they take an initiative? So these are all three connected together.
Right.
Number one, if you take the Iran and Iran situation, it's true that in Iran there are laws against apostasy. If you leave Islam, you can be executed, and they do it so brutally. There have been a very sharp, powerful communist movement there. The Tudeh party was a very, very powerful political party at one time, which everybody thought would be overthrowing Shah's regime. But of course, they went under the influence of Islamic regime. But the leaders of the Communist Party, all of them, the top leaders, were all executed. And others who escaped from Iran are in America or in Britain and other parts of Europe now. In Britain, there are a lot of former communists leading in other areas of freedom of speech in Iran. There's a lot of resistance in Iran. And then they are going back. They have relatives there. A lot of Iranians are coming out even now to study in other parts of the world. They are going back with a lot of ideas which will have also an influence there in Iran. And this survey that shows that more than 50% of the Iranian population are non-religious does not say that they are all with one political ideology. Many people have seen the dark side of Islam and the way it is implemented, and their dream for a free world, to have freedom, to have breathing space, and freedom of speech, and the way they want to dress and all these kind of things. They want the pubs to be open. They want to have a good life. They want to have a decent social order where they have their opinions expressed and all these kind of things. But it's not possible. Now it's only possible that you can get to be a student and you can go out and then try to migrate somewhere in Europe, and that's the only way now. But the moment the law of apostasy is taken off, there'll be an exodus out of Islam. It's very clear. If the people who are leaving Islam are not persecuted, if they are not killed, a lot of people would leave from in Iran out of Islam. The same case with Saudi Arabia. I know for myself a lot of people in Saudi Arabia, as a lot of Indians are working there, and first-hand information I gather sometimes from some of these people. I have very close friends who work in the Arab countries, and I always try to get first-hand information from them and cross-check with the official information coming from elsewhere. And that's the same case with different countries. Though it's death penalty waiting for them if they are blasphemous, if they criticize their prophet, or if they criticize the faith in Quran. Still, a lot of people are discussing atheism. A lot of people are discussing about a free world as dreamed by the rationalists, that's all under great discussion there, but they cannot come out. Now, coming to the Indian role in what one could do in Afghanistan, one possibility is that can we India negotiate with Taliban? No, at this moment it's difficult because Taliban does not have a kind of a discussion format available. They don't have an established government, and also India has serious concerns about Afghanistan because a major section of the leaders think that the next extension of their holy war is Kashmir, and Pakistan would be very much interested in that, and because also in Pakistan there is a Taliban. So very clearly India has a serious concern about the whole thing. But all the same, apparently India would be addressing the issue very carefully because all the diplomatic avenues are to be opened, and it should be, handled in very different ways at that time. So the democratic forces in Afghanistan or democratic forces in other, closed societies can come out only when it is supported, only when they have a feeling, a breath that they could do something meaningfully. People would be trying to lose their life when there is a desperate situation. But we don't want to lose all these lives. Of course, there'll be a lot of misery, a lot of suffering. That all would be there. But therefore, we have to find ways to empower these people, strengthen these people, and a kind of a network building up all around with the international public opinion pressing upon them. And similarly, there can be economic sanctions, not to the extent that the whole people are suffering, but the government can be economically pressed into certain negotiable positions if they make a government ever upon. And on the other side, as some people rightly pointed out, groups liberated who are still fighting can be more empowered and they can be encouraged to locally fight. And as you rightly said, another major point, these different belief patterns that people have. If totally Islam, but that they're different, but if you go into the details, there are different interpretations of Islam by different groups. All these warlords, warlords or mafia lords or whatever you call it, or the opium lords, tribal chiefs, they all do not follow one ideology, one frame or one interpretation of Islam. They have separate faith structures. They have their own interpreters who would make fatwas as they wish. There are two interests. One is their faith interest. The other is their local economic interest. Because every tribal chief wants to eliminate or decline the opponent. And all these groups are existing on the basis of different faith groups. The enemies are identified by these tribal chiefs as religion and people who are opposing their faith. They are using religion to eliminate their opponents. So it's a give and take. There is a nexus between local faith groups and the tribal chiefs who are the warlords. So this fight can emerge as a conflicting point is one possibility. On the other side, even when there are different interests or faith conflicts, if there's a common interest, if that will build up a common market or economic interest, these differences can diminish also. For example, South Asia, when SAARC is coming up, there is a common interest of expanded market. One of the factors that keep India together is the enhanced market. If anybody dismember from India, their economy will be in trouble immediately because they lose the whole market. So a market is one of the tying forces of a nation, is something which is not generally spoken. We speak about territory, language, history, and the geographical position and a common heritage. But a common binding economic interest is another thing that will diminish other divisive forces and force them to come up together. So in Afghanistan, if they build up a common economic interest, these conflicts and these religious divisions can diminish also. But the possibilities are too less because they are too narrow-minded people. They are not open-minded and flexible to think about the possibilities of an expanded nationalism that can involve different groups and absorbing different groups. Anyway, that's a good thought. Good thought. Everybody is thinking very strategically these days. Thank you very much. Yeah, now Sri Krishnan.
Yes, see, I have two questions. Second question is not important, so I will make it first. And the first question important, that I will tell you later. The second unimportant question is this. In Kashmir, 1948 resolution is there to conduct referendum. Kashmir people never wanted to be with India, and we are spending 6 crore per day, 6 crore per day in rupees. And I think we should go do a referendum and let the Kashmir people do what they want. That is a minor, and I am skipping it and coming to the first question. First question is important. I need your opinion. I know your time is limited, right? But still. So Britishers had fought in Afghanistan for 90 years. 4 Anglo-Afghan wars were there. They got defeated. And by about 1919 or so, Afghan got freedom, much ahead of India. Then when we say about America, it is not 20 years. They fought in Afghanistan for 42 years, from 1979 to 2021. And in fact, in 1989, when USSR left, there was a golden opportunity and they didn't use it. They went for, forming their own puppet government. Najibullah was killed. They are all known. Now, my question is on this background. So 42 years they were there, and they had supported the Pakistan and the madrasas where this Taliban and other people were all trained, correct? Now we are talking about Taliban. There were other jihadist groups. Now, all these jihadist groups might have got merged into Taliban. That's the current Taliban, which came in 1994. But the actual history goes back to 1979. So all those groups are there in Taliban now. So all these jihadists and as well as Taliban were all supported by America through, raising fundamentalist religious propaganda, pictures, or people with guns, etc. So totally undemocratic thing which they did. So now that has to be blamed. We have to find, say that was wrong, that 42 years, that nobody is doing, right? Number one. Number two is much more important that, and in that, they had supported all these things. They know who they are. They know, otherwise they can arm twist the Pakistanis to get to know who they are. At least last 20 years, they know some of them through the current, the previous Afghan regime. They know who they are. They can find out who they are. It is not an effort like killing Osama bin Laden. It's a much lesser effort to identify the culprits and take them to task. Why are they not doing a concerted effort towards this? That is USA. That's my question. Thank you.
So that's a question you should ask straight away to Biden. Why they do not do it? Because I can only see as a detached person who doesn't have any political power to exert. I can speak only as an analyst. And my understanding about why they did not do. So 40 years continuously, USA did not have influence on Afghanistan. There was major periods, that was a fighting ground at one side. And Soviet Union was more and more reaching there. When Najibullah came to power, that was a totally pro-Moscow government at that time. So that was one point where US had a special interest because, it was a strategically important place. It's a geopolitically powerful, center of, Central Asia and South Asia. And of course, Najibullah was overthrown by, US interests. It was very clear. But there was a radical Muslim group, apart from all these kind of things, which was existing there for a long time. It was continuously growing over the years for many decades. So who is the culprit? We can define when we think which side we are standing at. So if you feel that whatever Soviet Union has done is correct, and if you stand at that position, you can accuse everything on USA. If you think that, if you're an anti-Soviet Union mindset, if you have, you can think and you can say that why Soviet Union wanted to reach there and make their own government, and what was their strategic interest, whatever it is, what was their business here, one can ask on the other side. You can accuse and blame each side. But that is how global politics is, because there are conflicting interests, there are conflicting economic interests, there are conflicting strategic interests, there are conflicting market interests. A lot of interests are there by all these powers. Every single country. Don't expect that these countries have any kind of great ideology in the international politics that is driving them forward. Every single country, whether it is United States, whether it is USSR, whether it is India, whether it is China, every country has their national interest. And whatever they do at the end of the day is for their national interest, for the advancement of their position, for the advancement of their military defense, the advancement of their economic interest is what they are doing. But broadly, some principles also guide, and they would not violate them. They would stand for certain things. But when the private interest of a nation, of a national interest, plus the ideology comes, we have seen that many places, many of these world powers, whether it is Soviet Union, whether it is United States, whether it is Britain, whether it is France or any other countries, we would say that the national interest, national economic interest, and the military geopolitical interests overtake ideology, and they come with explanations. Therefore, don't expect too much from any country, but what we should think about building up a nation from within. And public opinion in all these countries, including in United States or in the Western world, is an important factor. No government can really do anything without considering the public opinion in the modern world, especially in the post-World War scenario. Vietnam War ended not because the weaponry was over, not because there was any economic crisis, because there was public opinion in United States. There was public opinion from the world intelligentsia against that. People like Bertrand Russell came in streets with slogans and with placards. That has moved in the campuses. There was a resistance against Vietnam. That is why USA has withdrawn, because there was a democratic pressure on that. And in Afghanistan, when US withdraw now also, it's not because they did not want to remain there, because there was pressure in United States. In United States, it's hailed, it's appreciated that they've withdrawn. And it is not now the present government that said that they would withdraw, but Obama had a promise to withdraw from Afghanistan, because their people are fighting in far off places, and there is a democratic opposition against that inside United States. And they cannot overcome this public opinion over a long time. They have to succumb to the pressure of the public opinion. That's why our kind of meetings, our kind of discussions, and the media discussions, and the newspapers, and the opinion makers, and all these people who are articulating the positions are influencing global politics, because it's, at the end of the day, it's public opinion, it's public view that is influencing the course of global politics. Therefore, the opinion makers are more powerful than any kingdoms, or any governments, or any republics, or any nations. As earlier times we would say that the pen is mightier than any gun, but we can now say that the media, or earlier one could say that the keyboard is more powerful. Then you can say now that your mobile phone is more powerful than any atomic bomb. The way you communicate, the way you can reach people now with your communication skills that is available to everybody, that's where changes come. So don't think that it's an ideology that is driving anybody. It's a national interest that is driving people. So why they did not change, why they have interest is explained very clearly. USA had their interest, USSR their interest, now China has their interest, India has its own interest. It's all possible. Now another question, you asked about the referendum. It's not referendum, it's a plebiscite. The difference between a plebiscite and a referendum. Referendum is to take a decision about a subject by a given government. Plebiscite is an voting to decide about which part of the world you should belong to. So no country in the world would allow its territory to go away, because every nation has an interest of its territory. I'm detaching myself from the situation. India has certainly an interest in Kashmir, because if India allowed Kashmir to go away, that would be a fundamental mistake of India's geopolitical interests. Would Spain would allow Catalonia to go away? No. Such struggles are prolonged very long time, and that can have big consequences. No given country would allow its territory to go away by a plebiscite. If in Catalonia there was an voting against being with Spain, there was a government that was in Catalonia in Spain. They did not allow it. In Scotland, there is a great movement to go away from the United Kingdom. It's not coming into reality. So don't expect that any country in its capacity can do a plebiscite and disperse the national territories. That's not possible. That's not the way the present countries are existing. It can be possible in a future time, that this is not that important which part of the world you belong to, whether you want to live independently or not, when borders melt down. And when a situation comes that the boundaries and other things are different, and a kind of a global, for example, in Europe, the borders have gone. economic activities are across the borders. If such a situation emerges in the whole world, so whether you are an independent nation, whether you are part of this country or that country does not matter much. In earlier times also, these were big issues. When Lithuania and Poland have been one commonwealth with a common interest, later they separated. And Hungary, Austria-Hungary was a huge empire which was divided and gone into different forms. Czechoslovakia has been split into two countries, or the Balkan countries, Yugoslavia, such a wonderful, unity of different cultures together has splintered into different forms. But it was all not in the interest of those nations. It's the decline of the nation when subnationality split away, and no country would accept that. And I think in the present scenario, one should not have any wrong understanding that such a thing will be accepted by any country, and no country with its interest as a national unity would accept that. So for Pakistan, Kashmir is an active issue because they want to show a national goal which should unite them together. And of course, Kashmir is an interest in Pakistan. They would like to keep the Kashmir issue on to keep their national identity together, or collect all these different forces together. Because if there is a common enemy, it's good for them. Therefore, I've been researching on Pakistan-India relationship in the Jawaharlal University. So one of the major points of the anti-Indian feeling in Pakistan is the national necessity to have a common enemy, to keep all these forces together. So that's how nations remain as nations for several factors, including a common enemy, not only a common territory. That we do not speak is common economic interest is one interest, which is not discussed in the early definitions of a nation, but also a common enemy is a factor. So no country can be expected to leave their territory to other people. No power go by its own decision. Power is power, and once you are in power, it can be removed. In a democratic system, it can be removed. It's allowed. When democracy is denied, when people's right to change the policies are denied, it cannot be even influenced in policy matters. So there is no easy solution for most of the problems in the world, but in the given framework only we can think about the solutions. When people don't accept the present order of the world, or the ideas of united existence as a set of nations together, then it will become more and more difficult. Therefore, there should be other efforts to handle it. That's where Afghanistan becomes an issue of discussion. That's where our concerns about the future of Afghanistan becomes more valid. That's why the misery that people may undergo in any effort to modify the present status quo in Afghanistan can be very painful. Thank you very much. All questions are over. We come to an end. And thank you for the excellent cooperation and the brilliant questions. Thank you very much.